As I said, algorithmic bias is not inherently bad. We as a society started noticing that data is very important. Should we build technology in a way that it includes people from vulnerable communities? And the answer is yes. Is it simple? Absolutely not. Media literacy, information literacy, digital literacy, and data literacy have some overlap, but they also have some specific, things that describe them that make them unique. The interest in algorithmic bias as a, let's say, social technological phenomenon starts like 5-10 years ago. And in short, it is a situation in which algorithms implemented in some solution, I don't know, a banking scoring system, an application to recognize faces, right? So this algorithm is biased towards something, like I don't see people who have darker skin, or I have troubles saying what am I seeing, and the reason for which the trouble is there is because data are more skewed towards men, or I do have not sufficient data. My data set is not diverse enough, so I struggle with properly representing needs of a specific part of a community. So in short, algorithmic bias is a technology that at scale discriminates against different groups of people because of different technical reasons. Just to keep it plain, algorithmic bias is not something that is inherently bad, right? From technical perspective, you can bias your algorithm just because you know that data set is not very diverse. So you bias the algorithm so that it, makes it more even, makes it more inclusive in the output of what algorithm is doing. So, as I said, algorithmic bias is not inherently bad, but in situations which I observed, I researched, in many cases, algorithmic bias is not always, but usually a representation of how society is being unequal in many cases. So if you think of any inequality, like, I don't know, poverty, being black, being a woman, being older, having or not having access to the internet, or even, I don't know, in some cases of algorithmic bias, we also know that living next to someone who has been in jail, these data points can be easily caught by algorithms and all the models that are being built, and conclusions can be made just based on that. So you as a person who approaches, let's say, a system, like, I don't know, you go to a bank, or you go to jail, or you go, I don't know, you apply for a job somewhere, there might be, and most probably there is some algorithm, some system, some model, which assesses your CV, assesses the way in which you respond to answers, assesses the way in which you look, etc., etc. And there is a plethora of different situations in which pervasiveness of algorithmic bias has been proven. It's not that it's using. I would say that algorithmic bias is something that it has to be accounted for when you create any technology and any model and any algorithm. So, because the bias can come not only from the data that you use for training, it can be present in the way in which algorithm is being written, in the way in which the whole technology is being thought of. So, for example, I wouldn't call it algorithmic bias. I would probably call it some sort of an excluding technology. I call it excluding technologies because it's a little bit more broad than just algorithmic bias. Algorithmic bias itself is mostly refers to what algorithms do with the data that they get. We can ask ourselves, who is responsible for creating technologies, right? So we can ask ourselves, who actually decides that this particular application is being released, right? What sort of functions are there? Are we including functions which we haven't thought of because we didn't know they were necessary, etc., etc. So if we have an application or a website or any technology that there is, are we actually certain that all the decisions that we made will give us the result that we actually want? So for instance, if we create a website, which is, e-commerce store, are we actually perfectly sure that all of the people we want to target will be able to use this website? So for instance, if we are having a shop which is aimed at, people age 60 plus, because we have some products for a little bit less young people, are we sure that it is accessible enough for them? So if they open our website and our shop on the desktop or on the laptop, will they be able to use it? If they use, and we know that a lot of older people use smartphones, will they be able to use it? Will the buttons will be big enough, etc., etc.? So it's not only the way in which we think about the, let's say, backend of technology, the data, the algorithms, but also the front end of technology. So how accessible it is for people to use it. And the idea of accessibility of technology doesn't necessarily have to come from technology perspective, right? It is a thought which says, I am building something that is being used by a lot of people, hopefully those people who I want to target, but other people will also use it, whom I haven't thought of, but they will be a very good client of mine. So how do I make sure that these people are also taken care of? There is no single definition of data activism. It can be, a person who knows how to code and how to scrape data from internet, and they use it to put pressure on companies, right? So this is data activism because we use data, and this is like an activism, let's say, endeavor. But also, like, in the most radical way in which activism can be thought of, it's, a group of people trying to shut down a data center, right? Or throw a rock at Google Bus or whatever. Because this is like a form of this is a form of resistance towards, let's say, big tech, right? And how can we use the technology that they're building and data they are gathering to fight their practices that we consider being malicious? But also it can mean that we see that there are a lot of data, or there are not so many data which should be there, and because they would be helpful. How can we approach that? How can we gather them? How can we use technology to make sure that specific groups of people are being visible? So, for instance, during the current, unfortunately, crisis at the Polish-Belarusian border, there is a lot of discussion about how can we properly gather data about this crisis. So how many people are there? How many people need what exactly? How many people died? How many people were refused help, etc., etc.? Because, well, in our world, only with data we can use it as a leverage, as a argument, or as a data point in an argument with the government to actually push for a specific change. So to wrap this up, I would say that data activism is mostly about using data in different ways, either to fight for something, to fight against something, somebody, some company, or to create something that can be helpful and beneficial to the society. With data literacy, we also tend to say not only data literacy per se, but we say literacy in the age of data. And why is it important? Well, mostly because we as a society started noticing that data is very important. Do we like it? I don't know if people like it, but do we like data? I would say the majority don't like data. When I talk to my students who are cultural science students, so mostly humanists, when I tell them my first classes that we'll be doing a lot of data analysis, they become really anxious and really sad because data analysis is not something for them. This is not why they chose, cultural studies. And then we start to unpack this idea of what data is. It doesn't have to be like, very difficult statistical functions or whatever. It doesn't have to include, but should. It doesn't have to include programming, but should, because it's easy. It doesn't have to include like, super high-level mathematics or super low-level mathematics. No.
Looking for more resources in topics like countering disinformation, cybersecurity, personal and organizational resiliency, building positive narratives, or media literacy? Visit the HiveMind platform, an online hub with free content, tools, online courses, and ability to connect with digital activists across the globe. Embrace the power of community with HiveMind.